Okay, I think I'll start doing some introductions and get things going. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the PBA's second webinar. We hope to keep these webinars up, hopefully on a monthly basis, and we'll keep those advertised within the LinkedIn group. So do keep your eye out for future webinars. My name's Adam. I'm one of the founding members and have the pleasure of introducing our guests today. So today we're talking about the Payroll Apprenticeship, addressing the skills gap, and we've got Ian Holloway, who's the Head of Legislation and Compliance at Sintra, and we've got Nick Phillips, who's the HR and Payroll Developments Manager at Leicester County Council, both of which in their spare time also do a lot of good stuff in the background for payroll, and they've both been involved with sort of writing the apprenticeship sort of framework that they're going to discuss today. So if everyone can keep themselves on mute, there will be questions at the end, so rather than ask them throughout, what we'll do is once the presentation's ended, we'll unmute everyone, and then because we've only got about sort of 16-18 people sort of on there today, it shouldn't be sort of too bad to open up everyone and then ask questions that get saved as we go. So onwards and upwards, I shall hand you over to Ian, who will now kick us off.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's just start with an agenda of some things that I want to talk about. The first thing I want to talk about is what is a statutory apprenticeship, a government-approved apprenticeship. So I want to talk about that first of all, and specifically the Payroll Administrator Apprenticeship, which I was the trailblazer on. I mean, it just seems so long ago now. Nick was on the trailblazer with me, and I thought it was really interesting that Adam said about the apprenticeship framework, because that doesn't apply to apprenticeships. So I'm going to tell you why it doesn't actually apply, because the two things that actually make up the Payroll Administrator Apprenticeship are the standards. So that's one document, which I'll talk you through. And the second document is the Endpoint Assessment Plan, or the EPA plan. Then I want to talk about funding and the recent incentives that the government has announced, plus the existing incentives that are available for employers who want to take on an apprentice. So it's the existing ones and the new ones as well. And I really do think out of all of the incentives, the one for taking on an apprentice is perhaps the best one. And maybe it's the one that actually will work as we get back to a new normal. Then I'll hand over to Nick, who's going to talk about how he has taken the standard and the endpoint assessment plan for the Payroll Administrator Apprenticeship, and he's developed into a live and active offering that he is doing with colleagues. Then he'll come back to me, and I want to point out some considerations for employers as well. Let's go on then and talk about what a statutory apprenticeship is. And I think it's worthwhile saying that skills and education is a devolved responsibility. So what is a statutory apprenticeship in England might not be a statutory apprenticeship in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Now in England, excuse me, there are some apprenticeships that are being offered through frameworks, but the new way of working is apprenticeship through standards. In actual fact, from the 1st of August, any government monies that are going towards funding statutory apprenticeships will only be given if the apprentice is following an apprenticeship standard. So whilst there's still frameworks in place, there'll be no government monies in place for those frameworks from the 1st of August. But then you're looking at the devolved nations, and they've got frameworks in place. Now, the only place in the United Kingdom with a standard and with a recognised government-approved payroll apprenticeship is England. The one in Scotland is something else. Wales, I don't think we've got one. In Wales, to be quite honest, and I don't think they can spell. I just don't think they've got one in Northern Ireland. So the only place that there is a government-approved payroll apprenticeship is in England, where it's a standard. Frameworks do exist, but very, very sketchy in the other parts of the United Kingdom. Another misconception, I think, about apprenticeships is that they're only available for people coming into the workplace for the very first time. Well, that doesn't apply with the way that apprenticeships have changed, certainly in England, and that's going to be my focus, talking about England. Because yes, absolutely, they can be used and should be used for people coming into a profession, any profession, for the very first time. But the money that the government will give employers is much wider. So it's not just for new people coming into the profession, so your 16-year-old that's left school, but it's also people that are maybe, they've been in payroll for 13, 20, 50 years, something like that, but actually want to upskill. So I think we need to change our mindset a little bit. Yes, new people coming into the profession for the very first time, absolutely essential. But also, if you've been in the job for a little while and you want to upskill that person, then the apprenticeship is also applicable. And as I'm going to say later on, this does result in a proper apprenticeship qualification issued by the Education and Skills Funding Agency. So it's a proper and it's a recognised qualification. And that's the question that I get asked more than anything. Is this qualification a professional qualification? And really what we need to do is we need to stand back and we need to look at what qualifications are actually available on the market. And you've got the first type of qualification, which I class as a commercial qualification, excuse me, which means that an organisation has put it together because they think it's right for the profession. And ultimately, the aim of that commercial qualification is to generate revenue. Different with the apprenticeship qualification. The apprenticeship qualification obviously is going to generate revenue for the apprenticeship training provider, which I'll talk about later. But the main difference with the apprenticeship qualification, it wasn't built by somebody or people because we thought that that was right. It was built by members of the profession specifically for the profession. So that applies with any apprenticeship qualification, not just the payroll one, but with the payroll one, we definitely, on the Trailblazer, we definitely looked and said, well, what's right at this level? What is right for the profession? What knowledges, skills, and behaviours should people have at this level? So therefore, what I consider is that the only qualification that employees, either new or upskilling employees, should be going through is the apprenticeship qualification, because it's built specifically for the payroll profession, and also it's a vocational qualification as well. So it's not just calculating tax, calculating national insurance and that kind of thing. It's applying that at the workplace, and that's what the apprenticeship training provider should actually be doing through the training, applying the learning at the workplace. And in actual fact, that is what the employer is going to want to see as well. So they don't just want them to learn all of the necessary things that are applicable at this level as decided by the profession. They want to be able to apply those things at the workplace. And this vocational professional apprenticeship qualification details in it, and I'll go through these in a little bit more detail on later slides, the knowledges, the skills and behaviours that we as a profession have thought, well, yes, this is applicable to all people at this particular level. What I want to talk about briefly is the employer group that made up this that comprised or compiled this apprenticeship qualification. So there was me in the middle, and I get so annoyed when people say, oh, it's Ian Holloway's apprenticeship. It's not my apprenticeship at all. I was really the only one who had a Word document open, and I was listening to the views of many, many different employers, payroll bureaus, so large payroll bureaus, tax agents, bookkeepers. I had construction industry scheme people on there. I had older people on there. I made sure that there was a lot of women on there because women are better at multitasking and all that kind of thing. But I had professional organisations, educational establishments as well, retail establishments, agricultural property as well. So I took the views of all of these people. So I said, well, what do you think is applicable at this level? Now, somebody in the construction industry scheme would think, well, this is applicable at my organisation. Somebody in agriculture would say, well, this is applicable at my organisation. And what my role was as Trailblazer Chair was to take the views of all of the different areas that we were that I was consulting with via the Trailblazer or the employer group, and put it together into a standard that accurately and as best as it possibly could represented the views of the whole payroll profession. Because the payroll profession isn't just made up of, doing payroll at the BBC. We've got to consider the likes of, well, Sintra is a payroll bureau. SD Works were on there. SD Works is a payroll bureau. I had my friend Kate Upcraft, she was on there. She was doing small payroll. So she operates as a payroll bureau and operates as a tax agent as well. So it was very, very important that we compiled an apprenticeship that was applicable for the whole profession, regardless of how you did your payroll, whether or not it was in-house, whether or not you outsourced it, or whether or not you were a payroll provider, an outsourced payroll services provider. And I believe that we've done that, because I did ask a number of people to look at it. Have we made sure that it covers your profession? Does it cover the public sector? Does it cover the construction industry scheme? Does it cover agriculture? Does it cover bureaus? Does it cover agents? And I believe that we've done that as best as any apprenticeship and any qualification possibly can. So going back to the two vital elements that make up the payroll administrator apprenticeship, which, as I said, isn't available just for new people, it's available for people that are upskilling. We've got the standard. Now, the standard, and I've got links to this on some information that I've given Tracy. I've got links to the standard and the endpoint assessment plan, so she will send all of those links out later. But the standard is essentially just an overview of what the apprenticeship is all about. So where does the apprenticeship sit? What would a person actually be expected to do as a payroll administrator once they've got the professional vocational qualification? And importantly, in that standard, it details that the employee, and they are an employee, so they're an apprentice, but they're also an employee under a contract of employment. It details that the employee must have at least level 2 English and mathematics. So that's a given. They must have a level 2 English and mathematics. So level 2, that's O-level type. And then for the payroll profession, what it details is the knowledges. Now, the knowledges I describe as things that it's necessary for the employee, the apprentice, to know at this level. So it would be, well, where does your business sit in the organisation? Are you a tax agent? Are you a bureau? Are you an in-house provider? Are you retail? Are you public sector? Are you private sector? So there's that business awareness, customer awareness. So who are your customers? I was talking to an apprentice the other day, and it was very interesting. In actual fact, I said, well, who are your customers? And I was expecting her to come back and say, well, our customers are employees. But she was working for a payroll bureau, and she said, well, our customers, actually, our stakeholders, are actually our clients. And I thought, that I hadn't really thought about it like that. But in actual fact, yeah, that's exactly how it is at payroll bureaus. Exactly when I talk to clients, they are my stakeholders. So know your business, know your customers. So that's absolutely essential. But also you would need to know how to calculate tax and national insurance and student loans, apprenticeship levy, statutory sick pay, statutory maternity pay, all those kind of things. So in that regard, there's quite a significant amount of knowledge that's in the this 3-page standard. But not only the knowledge is the information that's got to be imparted, possibly for the first time to an apprentice, but also the necessary skills. So it's fine to have the knowledge of being able to calculate tax, of being able to do a P11D, something like that. But The skill is actually being able to do it. So how would you do it? So you've got to have the knowledge to recognize that you've got to know how to use your computer system, whether that be, well, whichever payroll system you're using, but then you've got to have the skill of actually being able to do it in the workplace. And then the third thing, or the fourth as it's on there, is the behaviors that are necessary for a payroll administrator apprenticeship. And these are things like, a payroll administrator needs to behave ethically. They need to behave in accordance with data protection. They need to be able to tie their shoelaces. They need to be able to tie their tie. It's more than just an all-rounded payroll administrator is more than just having the knowledge of being able to do certain things. They have to have the skills to do those knowledges and the behaviors to be able to actually live in the role as a payroll professional. That was approved, that standard was approved before the endpoint assessment plan, and that was approved over 2 years ago, government approved. So it was painstaking putting the documents together in the first place, and then going through the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education for their review. Then it went on to a higher review, onto what they call a root panel. They reviewed it and they came back. Actually, they didn't come back with comments. No, it just passed through. Then it eventually went through another review, and then eventually went up to ministerial level. And it's only at ministerial level, and the minister at the time was Anne Milton, and she signed it off. And it was only at that point, so after a number of stages of review, that it actually became a live standard. But the standard is only one part. It's telling you this is roughly the what somebody will be able to do. But what's crucial is the endpoint assessment plan, because it's fine for an apprenticeship training provider to say, well, I'm going to teach you this, I'm going to teach you that, I'm going to teach you this. So that's fine. But unless there's somebody at the end to assess it, well, the apprenticeship is redundant. And that's the point of the endpoint assessment plan. So as a trailblazer and working with apprenticeship assessment organizations, which I did, we came up with a robust endpoint assessment plan. So rather than just sitting in a gym like we used to do when we took our O-levels or our CSEs, 3 parts to the endpoint assessment plan. The first part is a series of multiple choice questions which will test some of the learning outcomes that are in the standard and written into the endpoint assessment plan. So we considered that for some of the learning outcomes where perhaps they just had to have an overview of certain things rather than an in-depth practical knowledge, that multiple choice was actually a valid method of assessing whether or not those learning outcomes had been achieved. The second method of assessment is a role simulation, where the apprentice is given, as the second part of their endpoint assessment trail, they're given a fictitious company, and they say, this is the company, and they're located in Bournemouth, and they do this and they do that, and they've got 2 people on there, one goes sick, one leaves, one has a tax code change, one does pay national insurance, one doesn't pay national insurance, and then it will be a question like, calculate the payroll for month 1, calculate the payroll for week 2, something like that. And also a number of other things are tested in this role simulation as well. So being a payroll administrator isn't just about calculating tax, whether someone's entitled to SSP. It's having the skill to be able to communicate that result to the necessary stakeholder, to your client. And the client or an employee might come to you and say, why have I paid too much tax? Now, it's just not acceptable for us to be able to say, well, I pressed the button and that's what the computer said. It's just not acceptable for us to do that. So we need to understand what our computer systems are doing, which is one thing, which requires a knowledge, but we need to be able to communicate that effectively using the right communication method. So that's what the role simulation will do. Multiple choice, or MCQs, as they're referred to by endpoint assessment organizations, RS, role simulation, as they're referred to by endpoint assessment organizations, leads on to PD. So the MCQs and the RS will test a lot of learning outcomes. And there are, if you look at the endpoint assessment plan and you look at the standard, there are a lot of learning outcomes. You will learn this, you must learn this, you must learn this, all of which have got to be tested at endpoint assessment. So some will be done by the MCQs, some via RS, and any others that won't be tested via those two first assessment methods are gobbled up, if you like, in this professional discussion. In the role simulation, to pass it, they just have to get a pass in all of them. But we were quite specific, or the Trailblazer was quite specific to me, which I had to relay to the Institute for Apprenticeships. No, a distinction is only awarded if they get a distinction in the role simulation. So this is where you've got this mock company where someone goes sick, someone gets pregnant, someone has a tax code change, that kind of thing. That's live. And that was approved on the 13th of June 2018. Regardless of what any organisation says, this apprenticeship has been around now for over 2 years. And I'm still hearing that people are saying that the apprenticeship is not available. It is absolutely available. The standard has been available since March 2018, and the endpoint assessment, which is the crucial thing, has been available from the 13th of June 2018. So there's still people out there saying, no, it's not available. It's not available, or there isn't any training providers for it. That's another thing I hear. No, it is available, but there's no training providers. I mean, it's absolute tosh, to be quite honest, people saying that. And I can understand that some of the people saying that, well, I can understand why they're saying it, to be quite honest, I can. But just for your information, the apprenticeship is live. But being live is one thing, being deliverable is another thing. And I want to talk about that as well as we go through. But what I want to talk about next, having said, right, okay, there's a standard there, which I really urge you to look at because it's flipping good. And the endpoint assessment plan, and it's flipping good. Have a look at it. It's really robust. I want to talk about the way that apprenticeships are funded and the government incentives that exist and the new incentives that are out there for employers. When it comes to funding, the very first thing, oh, right, okay, I've got a document, yeah, and it came out 31st of July, apprentice funding in England. So it's important that I mention it's England because apprenticeship funding in Wales is different. Don't know how it happens in Wales, to be quite honest. Scotland, it seems to be a bit, and there was an announcement this week from the First Minister there, and I don't know what happens in Northern Ireland, to be quite honest. But this document I've sent to Tracy as a PDF, and she'll send it out, and it's really quite a good document. But the most important thing about apprenticeship funding is to recognise that each apprenticeship standard in England will have a funding band. And so that applies to human resources, to accounts, to these people that shoe horses, what do you call them, farriers. Every standard will have a funding band. And the funding band for level 3 payroll administrator apprenticeship is £9,000. And that's really important. And I'll show you for why as we go through. What we should do, what employers should do, first of all, to be able to access the funds that may or may not be available, but probably will be available, is to create yourselves, as an employer, create yourselves a digital apprenticeship service account, because everything is going to be managed through this digital apprenticeship service. It was only available to one category of employers, but it's being rolled out, I understand, from October to all employers. So Bob the Builder will be able to have one, and the BBC will be able to have one. So all employers will be able to manage their apprenticeship and their funding through this apprenticeship service account. And again, I've sent some links to Tracy, and she will be able to send those to you, how to create this apprenticeship service account. Now, if you're an apprenticeship levy paying employer, what you'll be able to do is get the monies that you've paid as apprenticeship levy, plus you remember there's that government top up as well, 10% top up. You'll be able to draw down from the apprenticeship service on the levy funds that you've already paid. And as you're drawing it down, then you'll be able to say, well, I need to pay this training provider because they've done this bit of the course, and this training provider because they've done this bit of the course. So it's really like a bank account where we go, well, I need to pay Amazon, and I need to pay so-and-so, I need to pay my mother this, and I need to pay my partner this. It's really like a bank account, but that's your money. So create yourself an account. If you're a levy-paying employer, draw down on the monies that are in that apprenticeship service account. If you're a non-levy paying employer, you still should create an apprenticeship service account, but something new comes into play here. You're not paying levy funds, so you haven't got anything to draw down on. So what you can rely on is what they call co-investment or co-funding from the UK government. And that's where the funding band comes into play, which is very high for level 3 in payroll at £9,000. And what the co-investment means, and I've sent Tracy some links here because it's not as straightforward as it's on the slide there, but essentially what happens is that if you're not a levy paying employer and you meet certain criteria, so you're taking on an apprenticeship and they are developing new learning skills, so developing new knowledges, skills and behaviours, the government will pay 95% up to the value of that £9,000 funding band, and the employer will just meet the cost of 5% of that. So I think it's really a no-brainer, to be quite honest. If you're paying the levy, that's a cost to you anyway. If you want an apprentice, draw down on your apprenticeship service account. It may be that you want an HR administrator, maybe you want an accounts administrator, maybe you want a farrier, or if you want a payroll apprenticeship apprentice, maybe use your levy funds to draw down and pay for your payroll administrator to get the necessary knowledge, skills and behaviours. If you're a non-levy paying employer, why wouldn't a non-levy paying employer want to get this co-investment with the UK government, which actually I say it's UK government, it's only the UK government in England, so it's the UK government from Westminster, whereby the training provider will say, well, yeah, we'll do this, we'll do this apprenticeship for you, it'll cost you £8,000, say. The UK government will pay 95% of that £8,000. The employer will pay 5%. If the training provider says, well, it's going to cost you £10,000, well, the UK government will pay 95% up to the cap of £9,000. I hope that makes sense. So have a look at that co-investment, because I really do think it makes taking on an apprentice very, very attractive. Plus also there's some incentives involved as well. So there's some that exist at the moment. So if you take on somebody that's probably just come out of school, so they're between 16 and 18, you get £1,000 incentive. And what that's and how that's paid is the UK government give that to the Apprenticeship Training Provider. That's what ATP means. UK government give that to the ATP, and the ATP pass that to you, the employer. And the way that they pass that, it's not via a cheque, they don't do it via faster payments, it's all done through that apprenticeship service account. So the money comes from the UK government to the ATP puts it into effectively your digital bank account where you manage your apprentices. And there's another another incentive as well, and that's and I must admit I'm not that familiar with these, to be quite honest, but that's for 19 to 24, and they've got this, they're from care, or they've got a care plan, and I must say I'm not that familiar with it, to be quite honest, but the incentive is the same. £1,000, the UK government gives it to the ATP, the Apprenticeship Training Provider, the ATP then gives it to the employer. The next thing I want to talk about is just the end of this flipping coronavirus job retention scheme, which has just been, it's caused me to lose my hair. Adam's just lost pounds, haven't you, in weight? Okay, let's talk about the coronavirus job retention scheme, which is ending. By October, the amount that the UK government will refund as a grant from HMRC is reducing. So you'll still have to pay 80% of their reference pay, which is the last pay before the 19th of March 2010. You'll still have to pay 80%. but you will only be able to recover 60%, and the cap is reducing from 2,500 down to 1,875. The employer will already realise that they've got a cost because they're having to pick up pension costs and national insurance costs. Well, that applies from August. That applies from the 1st of August. And then the scheme ends on the 31st of October. So there's quite a significant cost, I think, when the coronavirus job retention scheme, especially if the income is not coming into the organisation, there's quite a lot of costs that are available, that are applicable to an employer. And I think, therefore, that's why the government and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, is quite definite that the scheme will end on the 31st of October, recognises, though, that there'll be costs, and has come up with this plan for jobs, which is really very, very interesting. So search for that plan for jobs, or look at anything that I might have written on LinkedIn, for example, because it really is very, very interesting. The first thing he's announced is this job retention bonus, which is going to apply UK-wide. So if you keep on someone after the end of the coronavirus job retention scheme and you retain them till the 31st of January, you'll get £1,000 per employee that you don't make redundant, that you actually retain. Then you've got these traineeships, which are going to only apply in England, unpaid. Need further details on that. You've got these Kickstarters, which is only going to apply in Great Britain. Not quite sure why it's only Great Britain, to be quite honest. And those Kickstarters are going to be funded by the UK government, or at least 25 hours at the national minimum wage is going to be funded by the UK government. But then you've got these incentives for taking on apprentices. And importantly, as it says there on the slide, they're in addition to the incentives that already exist. So if you as an organisation take on an apprentice between the 1st of August and the end of January next year, and they're young, between 16 and 24, you'll get £2,000. If you take on an apprentice, or take on an apprentice for the first time and they're 25 and over, you'll get £1,500. So I just think it's a no-brainer, to be quite honest. Job retention bonus, goodness knows how that's going to work. Traineeships, I don't know. Kickstarters, I can't see that being very exciting, but apprenticeships, you've got existing incentives, you've got new incentives, you've got a brilliant standard for payroll anyway. What is the holding employers back? And now I'd like to pass over to Nick, who was on the Trailblazer with me for level 3, and he's actually going to say how he's taken the standard and the endpoint assessment plan and he's making it work in reality. Nick, unmute yourself.
Thanks, Ian. Morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm hoping I can offer you a bit of a case study, which is going to demonstrate sort of a practical application of applying in reality the offering that Ian and the Trailblazer Group have put together. Ian and the Trailblazer Group, I always think sounds like a great band name, but he's not. Maybe
like Ian Jury and the Blockheads.
Exactly, yeah, yeah, but he's not taken me up on that yet. So yeah, start off though, I'm going to introduce myself. So yeah, I'm Nick Phillips. I'm from East Midlands Shared Services. So we are a public sector partnership organisation formed between Leicestershire County Council and Nottingham City Council. So we provide back office services, payroll, HR, AP, AR, all that sort of stuff, both to the partner organisations, but crucially on a bureau basis. We are a bureau, so we pay about 50,000 people across about 120 PAYE schemes, and that includes both our partner organisations, the two councils, plus a number of external organisations, mostly in the public sector, mostly academies, multi-academy trusts, some emergency services organisations, borough councils, that sort of thing, although we are starting to reach out now into the private sector too, and we have some private sector clients. Why am I telling you that? Well, I think it's important to know that we are a live payroll operation. We are a going concern. We are not a professional training company, or at least we weren't before the payroll apprenticeship came about. So we do live payroll. We know payroll. We face the challenges that you all face on the call. So when Ian talks about the CJRS or flexible furlough or anything that has come up these are challenges that we readily face and understand. So we think that puts us in quite a good position to be able to deliver the apprenticeship. Yeah, we've always been advocates of apprenticeships. By 2018, by the time the standard went live, we'd been hiring an annual intake of apprentices for about 4 years, and we'd had about 10 apprentices over that 4-year period. And our experience had generally been pretty positive. I mean, we had a pretty good retention rate. We had some internal promotion. We had one of them had won an Apprentice of the Year or a Rising Star award with reward strategy. We'd had a couple that had gone on to some of the further qualifications with the existing providers. So in that sense, it was all pretty positive. The one aspect of it that we maybe thought was ripe for some improvement was the formal qualification. I don't know if any of you guys shared this experience, but up until the payroll standard went live, all of our apprentices went through an MVQ in business administration. And that's not without its merits at all. I'm not here to denigrate that. They learn office skills, they learn behaviours, you know, as some of the things Ian referred to earlier, some of the things you need for working in an office, particularly if they're a school leaver or a classic sort of new apprentice. But it was very time consuming. There was a huge common sense aspect to it. So in that sense, it added limited value. And crucially, they didn't learn about payroll. And as we know, and as Ian has highlighted, it's a very specific profession with its own, well, I don't need to explain that to all you guys. And we were kind of having to double up on the training. I don't know if you found this too, if you've been an employer of apprentices, in that because they didn't really do any vocational learning of payroll in the apprenticeship, we had to, in effect, replicate that training ourselves, but with the payroll spin on it. So that was adding time for us, and it all meant that we weren't really getting bang for our buck, if you like, in terms of the original apprenticeship. And then if they wanted to do that formal qualification in payroll afterwards, through one of the established providers, we then had to fund them through that. And this is not a new problem. I mean, the lack of an apprenticeship route has been around for a number of years. I remember, and both the ability to do a formal qualification afterwards, or the need to do a formal qualification afterwards. I remember when I first wanted to do a formal qualification, the only route available to me was AAT, which is a fantastic qualification. I'm very pleased that I've got it, but it meant that, but it's not a payroll specific qualification. It has one small module where it very, very vaguely touches on payroll. And as much as that, you know, was great and whetted my appetite, I then had to go on and move on to study with one of the established providers. So you end up on about a 7-year cycle of training, which takes me away from the core business as far as my employer is concerned. And also it had to be entirely employer funded. So yeah, all that kind of coalesced in that we were really looking for a vocational aspect to the formal apprenticeship. So no surprises then that we were really excited when we first heard about what Ian was putting together in terms of the Trailblazer group. So yeah, we knew it would provide that industry level vocational qualification that would allow our apprentices to become occupationally competent. And I always think that's a key word that I hear, phrase, should I say, that I hear Ian use a lot. That's what we're looking for as employers, isn't it? Yes, we want them to get that grounding in the skills and behaviours, but we want them to be able to have those manual calculation skills, that grounding in payroll. So yeah, I think that was an absolutely key part of what Ian was doing. And also we want our apprentices to be able to hit the ground running and add value to our day-to-day operations as soon as possible in their training cycle. So again, the new apprenticeship achieves that. So yeah, the standard-based vocational apprenticeship that Ian has spoken about, it's a recognised payroll qualification. It's live. Let there be no doubts about that, as Ian said. And over the coming years, I think we all have ambitions that this will become the standard career path, the standard learning route for apprentices and existing employees who want to take on qualifications. So I don't know if Ian's going to perhaps talk about level 5 or level 7 later on in his slides, but we're looking to move beyond level 3 as well and have this an established career path that's recognised in its own right. I think as well, like other employers, we and it's a bit of an old-fashioned view maybe, but we kind of wanted an exam-based qualification. I feel a lot of employers feel like they want to see that their employees have had to demonstrate a little bit of rigour and go through exams are scary for all of us, even if we've just come out of school, but especially for those of us who've been out of academic learning for a long time. So to see that the apprentices are applying that learning in an academic setting gives us the confidence that they've really absorbed the learning, which is why that role simulation aspect of the EPA is so important. And as Ian points out, is the part of it which can attract the distinction if they're successful. So yeah, recognised as a recognised payroll qualification, recognises payroll in its own right. Absolutely a grounding in manual calculations. I'm very, very keen on that, and we hammer that quite hard in the course. We will not allow our apprentices to go through EPA unless we feel that they can calculate pay gross to net, well, build to gross and gross to net in a variety of different scenarios. That's really critical. But also not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and still keeping the skills and behaviours stuff. So taking the good stuff from the framework and still retaining that in the standard by making sure that we deliver the necessary skills and behaviours stuff, but we layer the knowledge content on top of that, which is so important. So yeah, we cover the payroll fundamentals and the manual calculations, and hopefully the end of it is, we're giving someone the full confidence to flourish, because we need those, as Ian mentioned, I can't remember whether it was in the presentation or beforehand, we need those Kate Upcrafts of the future, and we've got to start, and those Ian Holloways, and we've got to start building them now. So we recruited our own, we tried to get in as soon as we could, get in on the act, so we recruited our own payroll apprentices very shortly after the standard went fully live in June 2018. So yeah, if you want to move to the next slide, please, Ian. So yeah, but inevitably, challenges came with that. We'd had a mixed experience with some of the established providers, and we knew that the learning outcomes for the level 3 apprenticeship are extremely robust. So I wanted to deliver that training myself. My thought was, why not? How hard could it be? Particularly since we'd already had to train our previous apprentices in payroll when they were on the old framework. What I quickly discovered was maybe it was a little bit big-headed of me to think that, oh, how hard can it be? I can just go in there and it was a rude awakening to me when I started to look at the learning outcomes, see how robust they were, see that there was no shortcuts. Not that I want shortcuts, but there are no shortcuts to doing it correctly. You will get found out in the endpoint assessment if you do. So I quickly realised there was going to be a hell of a lot of research, a lot of hours that would need to go into developing the course. But I still wanted to go down that route anyway, really something I'm passionate about doing. So we luckily, as a local authority, we have the infrastructure to still be able to deliver the skills and behaviours aspects of the course, because I'm in EMS. Now we are payroll experts. We are a division of Leicestershire County Council, but within Leicestershire County Council itself, we have an accredited apprenticeship team and we've got that learning and development infrastructure. So we've partnered up with them. They are delivering the skills and behaviours aspects of the course, assigning the tutor, making sure we do everything we need to do that meets with the Institute for Apprenticeship criteria, but we in EMS are delivering the knowledge aspect of the course. So yeah, it turned out to be a massive task and a massive undertaking, because as I say, we do this on top of the day job. We are not a training company, or we've become one now, but that's not our main business. Yeah, we deliver the knowledge section. It turned out that we've had to chunk the apprenticeship down into the learning outcomes down into 16 sessions that are delivered directly to the apprentices across 5 different modules, starting with the core module and the pensions for payroll module, which equip them for the multiple choice and professional discussion aspects of the endpoint assessment. Then we move into the technical module, where we spend most of our time there, where we do the manual calculations, the real principal stuff of payroll. That's going to equip them for the role simulation. It's ended up being a course of over 800 PowerPoint slides, plus the written assignments, plus the marking of the written assignments, the reports that we have to write to the employers so that they're plugged into the progress of their staff and help us support them. The ongoing mentoring, so being available at the drop of a hat to the apprentices. Actually, it reminds me saying that Tracy had asked me to just focus on it from the other angle a little bit of what if you are the manager of the apprentice, having to support them. And the answer to that is that if you get the right training provider, then really your role as a manager, as a bureau manager trying to support your apprentice, is mostly about being willing to release them for that 20% off the job requirement, and having to plan that into, no doubt, a very busy payroll schedule that you have, and having to manage that resources. Providing you do that, providing you are, if your provider sends you employer reports and keeps you plugged in, as we try to do, providing you do that, providing you're willing to make the time maybe to support the apprentice face to face if they need it, because at the minute clearly that's difficult based on the current situation. Providing you're willing to do all that, I wouldn't say there is a massive onus on the manager that's gonna make it prohibitive in terms of you taking on apprentices. So, you know, don't be scared by that. We will try and make it as easy as possible for you to know what's going on without having to devote massive swaths of your time to being involved in the apprenticeship yourself. Next slide, please, Ian. So yeah, in terms of the challenges and how we overcame them, well, as I said, it required a lot of research and development to deliver the course. And I decided what I really needed to do is leverage the network that I have. We know we've got a great community of payroll professionals on LinkedIn. We know the fact that this group exists and that you're able to establish it is another indicator of what great community we have in payroll, and how payroll managers, particularly I think in the bureau setting, are, you know, willing to work together. So I got in touch with Kate, who I've known for a number of years, and she acts as a sponsor for the course. So she proofreads the materials. So one key thing about the course, even though I write it and deliver it, it can't be specific to local government, or it's just not going to be applicable. It needs to be applicable across the industry, or across any industry with it who works within payroll. So I've leveraged a lot of support and knowledge from Kate and others to help me with that, to proofread it, to make sure I'm not, I mean, I remember one example of that was when I'd written the slides about SSP, and I'd sort of said, well, you'd have the 3 waiting days, but yeah, every employer would really have an occupational scheme, so those 3 waiting days would really be would be paid. And actually, that, you know, because that's my experience in local government, but that's not the reality, is it? And I've learned that, and so we've now tailored the course to make sure it's absolutely applicable across the industry. And yeah, we also have Kate guest lecturing for us, which is a fantastic sort of bit of happenstance, is that Kate lives in Leicestershire, so she's been able to come on site until recently, because very recently living in Leicestershire, and Leicester has not proven quite so fortunate, as you may have heard in the news. But Kate comes on site, or until recently she delivers it remotely. So only yesterday, Kate delivered a session to our apprentices, teaching them, telling them about. It was a fascinating insight really into her experiences in the industry, and also some of the routes that they can go down once they complete the apprenticeship. So the fact that they get on transferable skills, because I'm realistic about the fact they're not necessarily going to be captive in their current organisations forever. They may want to go on and become a consultant, a campaigner, a lobbyist, a trainer, a tutor, a writer, all these myriad things that Kate does. So yeah, pre-COVID, and I still am, to be honest, I would rather deliver the course face to face. I think, especially with the manual calculations, being able to look over somebody's shoulder and say, oh yeah, you've not taken off the LEL before you've applied the 12% or whatever, is always easier. But the reality at the minute is we can't do it remotely, especially because we're in Leicester, or very close. We're very close to Leicester. We were in the Leicester lockdown zone. So yeah, but this has forced us to develop the remote offering, and that's a good thing in a sense, because it allows us to widen the geographical scope of our offering, because now we're fully set up to, if you're in Scotland, if you're wherever, we can deliver the course to your staff. We can do that remotely, so that's really exciting. So we have that blended learning where the skills and behaviour stuff is delivered by the council, and the knowledge stuff is delivered by EMS, and it's a commercial offering. So I won't shy away from that. I'm not sure my managers would allow me to have delivered it if it wasn't for the fact that there's a commercial aspect to it for us, where a proportion of the levy funds goes to us. We are a training provider. I wouldn't shy away from that. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
So yeah, some final thoughts really before I pass back to Ian. Yeah, employers should recognise and appreciate that, we have a vocational qualification now, one that's been developed by the industry for the industry. I think that's so important. So grateful to Ian, and I know he doesn't like to take all the credit himself, but so grateful to Ian and others for what they've done. It's for new staff, your classic school leaver apprentice. It's a great route for them. I wish these occupational standards were available, because I had a terrible time knowing what I was going to do. And like most people, fell into payroll and went through all sorts of difficulties in knowing it. So having those occupational standards, if you do want to become a farrier, as Ian says, then you've got that option too. Or you've got about, I don't know how many, there's hundreds of qualifications. If you go on the Institute for Apprenticeships website, it's fascinating, isn't it, Ian? In that, especially if you've got kids who are reaching that age where they might not know what they want to do next, you can go onto that and you can see that menu of all the apprenticeships and see what they involve. I think it'd be really good if you're a parent. But yeah, one of the main takeaways I think you should get from this session is a lot of people don't realise it's for upskilling existing staff as well. That is critical. So now, as standard in EMS, we put our guys, new starters, through the apprenticeship as standard. Levy funds can be used, or you've got the co-investment with the government, as Ian has explained. The only thing about the existing staff is it has to be new learning for them. So we can support you with that. They have to go through an initial assessment just to make sure that they haven't already had a formal qualification in payroll. Ian knows more about that than I do. You just have to be careful about that, but we would support you with that, or any provider worth its salt should help support you with that initial assessment. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I posed the question to you, and look, I'm not a salesman, I'm a payroller, so I'm not trying to do the hard sell on you. So whether it's us or any provider out there, and Ian's going to talk to you on some of his upcoming slides about how to view the full list of providers. So what I would say is, whoever you choose to go with, really think about whether you've got a team member who's got that potential, but maybe just lacking that confidence and just needs that grounding in the fundamentals and the manual calculations that's going to give them the full confidence to flourish and move on. And if you have got that, and you're using the levy funds, because the levy funds are use it or lose it, So it makes complete sense. It's a bit of a no-brainer, really. And it is about time as payroll we got a piece of the pie on this and weren't the, you know, the inferior cousin to finance and HR and some of the other disciplines who, you know, like me being put on the AAT back then. You know, that's something worth thinking about. So last slide, please, Ian. So yeah, further information. If you're interested in enrolling your apprentices onto our programme, Ian's going to talk to you about the formal ways that you sign up. But if you want to do that through me or speak to me about that directly, that's fine. If you are, you might be, your appetite might have been whetted to think, well, you can be the provider yourself. You can become an employer provider. You don't need me. You don't need any of these other providers. If you need some help in getting set up to do that, speak to me about that. I'd be happy to help with that. For advice on recruiting apprentices, what our experience has been of recruiting them, managing them, some of the issues that we've faced, the job descriptions, how to attract them, when to do when in the year based on the school year you might be best to do the recruitment, all of that. Contact me. I'm happy to talk about any of that using those methods below, or LinkedIn, or take a look at our website. And I think on that note, sorry if I've overrun slightly, but on that note, I'm going to hand back to Ian.
No, great. Thanks ever so much. And I think, as Nick mentioned several times during his presentation, one of the biggest considerations, I think, is the development of the material. And I keep saying to ATPs that the contact apprenticeship training providers, because I am doing this level 5 at the moment, and I'm meeting with the Institute for Apprenticeships tomorrow remotely here in Wales, and they're in Coventry. But I'm saying to ATPs and endpoint assessment organisations, there's a lot of work here. You know, you've got to put together the material. You've got to make sure that the material meets the learning outcomes. Plus, with payroll, like many other professions, although less if you're a farrier, there's one way to shoe a horse, and it probably hasn't changed since the 1800s. But with payroll, it changes every year, and sometimes it changes in the year as well. So, you know, the big consideration for ATPs and the big consideration for Nick, and if you're thinking of doing this, is, right, okay, preparing the material is one thing, but have I factored in enough time at the end of March to update that material? Because really, when you're doing your training from the 6th of April, it needs to be on the new tax year rather than the old tax year, because the endpoint assessment is going to assess you on the new tax year rather than the old tax year. So there's a lot of considerations there, and I just want to run through some more. And I keep pressing home this apprenticeship is live, despite what people might be telling you. You need to get this initialism probably in your head, ATPs, which is the apprenticeship training providers, because it's fine to have this stand and it's fine to have the endpoint assessment plan, but if you haven't got an ATP delivering it, well, the whole thing's redundant. It's like wanting to make an omelette. You know, you've got your eggs, you've got your frying pan, but you haven't got an oven. Well, you can't do it. And it's the same with this. You got the stand, you got the endpoint assessment plan. Now we need ATPs. We need apprenticeship training providers to actually deliver it. So to find an apprenticeship training provider, there's two ways, and both of them are via this, I call it the FAT website, and I don't know if that's politically correct, and it's the Find Apprenticeship Training website. And I think I'm the only one that calls it the FAT website. But if you go on to, if you Google Find Apprenticeship Training, you go in there and you search on the apprenticeship that you want. So in this example, payroll, and then it will come up with all of the apprenticeships that have payroll in the title. So you click on Payroll Administrator Level 3, which is the only one that's there. No, I beg your pardon, Level 5 is there at the moment as well, but that's still in development. And then on the right hand side, you'll see you can look at the endpoint assessment plan, and there's underneath there's a link that says find training providers that are delivering this apprenticeship. Alternatively, you can go onto the FAT website and you can look at the training provider that might be your training provider of choice, and you can see what apprenticeships that they're actually delivering. So if you've got a favourite one that's always been really good for you in the past, you can search by training provider, pull them up and find out if they're delivering the apprenticeship that you actually want. Now, having an ATP in place is absolutely great. So standard endpoint assessment is being delivered by an ATP, but unless someone's assessing it at the end, well, then again, it's redundant. It's like this omelette, you know, if you can't cook it, fine. But if you can cook it, but you can't eat it, then what's the point of making it? So I'm really pleased that the Institute of Certified Bookkeepers came on as the first endpoint assessment organisation, and then Dore & Scott Williams have come on as an endpoint assessment organisation. So it's really important that we've got a number of ATPs out there and EPAOs as well, endpoint assessment organisations, and both the ICB and DSW, Institute of Certified Bookkeepers, and Dore & Scott Williams have really robust endpoint assessment processes in place that fully meet the requirements of the endpoint assessment plan for the multiple choice questions, the role simulation, and the professional discussion. And I'm not going to make any apology again by saying the apprenticeship is live, but there's a consideration regarding apprenticeship training providers. And I think we really need to, it's like cling film, and it's like, you know, lager and gin. They're not all the same. It might say gin, but it's not all the same. And it's the same with apprenticeship training providers. I have seen some awful apprenticeship training providers, and I think they get into the payroll market because they can spell payroll. Therefore, they think, well, if I can spell it, I'm sure I can cobble together a training course. They're not all the same, and you really do have to look at the apprenticeship training provider. So you go onto the FACT website, you will enter your postcode or the postcode of the apprentice where they're working, and press search, and it will pull up all of the apprenticeship training providers that you could select. More than one will be shown more than one time, and that's obviously a marketing thing. But you click on them and you say, oh, but don't just select the first one. We don't do that with a builder. When we have a builder, we get a quote from this one, a quote from here. When we look at buying a new dress, well, I don't very often buy new dresses, but when we look at buying a new shirt, I don't look at this shirt, I look at another one and make a comparison. And that's what employers should be doing. They should be considered, there's a lot of money and time involved here. Consider the training provider that you're taking on. And importantly, you need to be sure that the ATP is on this register of approved training providers, approved apprenticeship training providers. Now, that's absolutely essential, because if they're not on the ROTP, then levy funding goes out of the window. So they absolutely must be on that list. And there is, again, you can Google a list of registered approved apprenticeship training providers, and it will come up with a list of all of the organizations that are on there. And absolutely, essentially, you need to pull up the endpoint assessment plan. And the back of the endpoint assessment plan, it has all of the learning outcomes. So they must learn SSP, and they must learn how to new starters and leaver processes, overview of benefits in kind, overview of court orders. Now, that's one of the things that we were quite specific at when we were putting it together. We thought, well, at this level, someone doesn't need to have an in-depth knowledge of, well, this is the court order you could get from Northern Ireland, this is the ones from Scotland, but they need to have just like a generic overview. So you need to make sure that the training offering that you're getting is actually giving you that generic overview of court order. It's the same with the construction industry scheme as well. Now, I've seen some apprenticeship training providers using other organizations' payroll training material, where, using the example of court orders, I said, but it goes on for hours about court orders. I said, you know, you only require an overview, basically, you know, how do you spell court orders and basically what is it? But this goes on for hours. So in actual fact, that training offering that you're getting, or that apprenticeship training provider has bought in from a commercial supplier of payroll material, actually will result in the person not meeting the learning outcome or exceeding the learning outcome. And when you talk about not meeting the learning outcome, that's just as important. These commercial training providers and the providers of information to a lot of the ATPs, those commercial qualifications don't match the professional apprenticeship qualification. So if the a training provider is using information from a commercial training provider, it's very unlikely that they will match. Therefore, what you as an employer should be doing is saying, well, I want you to do a match of all of the learning outcomes, and are you successfully going to meet all of the learning outcomes? And if you don't, and this is what I've been going through with one training provider at the moment, if you don't, which is fine, how are you going to fill those gaps? There's one thing in the apprenticeship which talks about the different categories of workers. So you've not only got employees, but you've got workers, and you've got office holders, and you've got directors and deemed employees as well, or deemed workers. Now, one training provider said, well, we can't provide that information. Well, okay, they can't provide that information, but how are they going to fill that gap? Because that gap needs to be filled, because I know at endpoint assessment, the apprentice will be tested on employment status. Absolutely. Devolution is another one. You know how Wales is different from Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland is different from England. Most training providers don't even consider that Northern Ireland might be slightly different and Scotland might be different. Don't even consider it at all. If they don't consider it in their offering to the apprenticeship training provider, quite simply, the apprentice will fail their endpoint assessment. So you really need to do a lot of research when you're looking at your apprenticeship training provider. And also, and this would be shown sometimes on the FAT website, but you should ask the apprenticeship training provider, well, out of all the apprentices you put through, how many actually pass it? Now, if they say, well, only 5% pass, you think, well, do you know, that doesn't sound good, to be quite honest. What mentoring or support do they offer? So it's fine to just vomit this information at the apprentice. This is what you've got to learn. These are the skills. These are the behaviours. But through on program, the learning stage, the apprentice, like everybody does when they're learning something, is going to need continued mentoring support. So what facilities is this apprenticeship training provider got for? Is it with a telephone? Is it going to be online? Is it going to be nothing at all? What kind of infrastructure is set up to support and mentor these apprentices? And how is it actually going to be delivered? Is it going to be online, or is it just going to be classroom based? Now, I've seen some offerings that are just classroom based, and I can't say to people, don't use that provider, but I suppose I can say, consider, do you want your apprentice actually leaving the workplace and going and sitting in a classroom? And actually, does your apprentice want to go back to school and sit in a classroom? Can it be done online? And as Nick said, you know, I think that the pandemic and everything that we're going through at the moment has taught us that an awful lot of what we used to do face-to-face or in a classroom can actually be done just as effectively online. I know I'm working with the Global Payroll Association on doing some webinars. And I can record those webinars, and people can get them at any time. They can watch them in bed, they can watch them before Coronation Street, or they can watch them at the workplace. It's absolutely fine. And it's easy for me to do them. I do them once, and the GPA do them. So it's cheaper for the apprenticeship training provider. Or are they going to offer a blended learning? So a little bit in the classroom, a little bit online. Now, blended learning probably isn't working quite at the moment, and I don't know if it'll ever come back. So perhaps look at online delivery. How is the apprenticeship training provider going to deliver it online? Because in actual fact, we're doing a Zoom thing now, and I can take questions afterwards. I'm absolutely fine. But I don't see any reason why things can't be done on Zoom or GoToMeeting or all that kind of thing. It's no different really than me being there. I suppose when you're teaching tax and national insurance, yes, as Nick said, it's nice to look over someone's shoulder and say, oh, you know, you've forgotten to take off the free pay. I suppose it's nice, and I had to do this professional discussion with an apprentice the other day, and I had to actually get her to show her passport and really put it up to the screen. Yes, that would be different if I was there in a room with her, but things are changing. So find out what your ATP is doing. But the most important thing is not all providers are the same. There's some awful offerings out there, but there's some good ones. The other thing, and Nick alluded to this, 20%, and again, we're talking about apprenticeships in England, because I've got the England flag there. It's this requirement that the employer allows the employee, the apprentice, to be away from the workplace for 20% of their time. So that is an absolute requirement of the apprenticeship. And what they call it, the OTJT, off-the-job training. And that's really what it is, the off-the-job training to meet the learning outcomes, to allow them to get new skills and behaviours and knowledges, must be at least 20% of working time. Now, if somebody simply works a 5-day week, that's equivalent to 1 day per week. So the consideration there is that 1 day per week is time when the employee, the apprentice, is not actually productive and doing any work for you. They must be away from the workplace. However, it doesn't actually mean that they have to actually go outside the workplace. They could maybe go into the boardroom for an hour, or they could go into the study room, or the employer could say, well, yeah, okay, I recognise that you need to do a bit of off-the-job training. Why don't you come in at 11 this week rather than at 9? Or why don't you go at 3 rather than 5? So there's a number of ways in which the employer can facilitate this 20% off the job requirement. And I've put in the pack that I've sent to Tracy an OTJT flow chart, because I really do think the employers have got to consider that, but they've got to be flexible about this and inventive about this. It's not just 1 day a week at the college, a couple of hours here, a couple of hours there, as long as in total over the course of the apprenticeship it's 20%. As long as the 20% is relevant to the apprenticeship, so you can't let them go and sort of like watch an Ian Jury and the Blockheads thing on YouTube in the boardroom, because that's not relevant to the apprenticeship. It's not going to result in new knowledge, skills and behaviours being acquired. And it must be within working hours. So if someone set up for 37.5 hours a week, 20% of that time, well, over the course of the apprenticeship, 20% must be off the job training. Now, it doesn't have to be every week, but it's over the course of the apprenticeship. So I know in payroll, we have busy times, but we have less busy times as well. So maybe the 20% could be more in the less busy times, but less in the busy times when you need the apprentice actually doing work. And also, yes, you've got that level 2 English and mathematics requirement as well. But if it meets all of those, and I've got this flowchart which I've sent to Tracy and she'll send out, if it meets all of those, that is off-the-job training. And another thing that I want to mention, and I don't think employers always realise this, and definitely working in a payroll bureau, I know that we've got a lot of clients that are employing employees on a UK statutory apprenticeship, standard in England, framework in the rest, and they're not utilising this facility where the employer doesn't pay national insurance contributions. The employee does, but the employer doesn't pay national insurance contributions up to the value of the apprentice upper secondary threshold, which currently is aligned with the upper earnings limit. Oh, and I've said this. Yeah, still frameworks in England, but I think that's been done away with now from the 1st of August, and yeah, frameworks in the devolved nations. If you've got any questions at all, I would say you can come to me on that address, or perhaps best contact me through LinkedIn, or go through the Payroll Bureau Association, because in actual fact, if you've got a question, I think it's good that the Payroll Bureau Association are aware of that question, because if it's a question for one person, it's going to be a question for more than one person, and maybe we need to fill that gap by maybe another webinar or something like that. And I mentioned these links that I've sent Tracy. Apprenticeship funding, I think, is going to be really pivotal. So there's 2 bits of information that I've sent, one from the DFE and one from the ESFA. oh, I shouldn't use all these initialisms. Department for Education, Education and Skills Funding Agency. Find apprenticeship training, that's that FACT website. I've sent something on there about these retention initiatives as well. And I think it's really important, and I hope that you'll see with the retention, if you've looked at Rishi Sunak's plan for jobs, the initiatives for retaining an apprentice or employing an apprentice for the first time, really great. That off-the-job training flow chart, which I've spoken about, and also the M's overview of the payroll apprenticeship and their offering as well. So how they have actually chosen to break down all the offering into all of those modules that Nick was talking about. And I really do hope that this webinar has given you an overview of what an actual apprenticeship is, must be a standard in England, which is excellent, excellent. And this payroll administrator apprenticeship made up of two parts: standard, endpoint assessment plan as well. Funding is really important for employers. Going forward, employers are going to want to utilise every penny that they can, be they an apprenticeship levy paying employer or one that's in co-investment with the UK government, which hasn't changed, So get in there now. Really interesting to see how Nick has developed an offering of the payroll administrator apprenticeship. But I think employers need to consider quite a lot. They really do. And I think that the thing I want to get over most, I think, is don't just select an apprenticeship training provider because they're just around the corner. Look at the apprenticeship training provider. We've got a builder outside doing something in the barn at the moment, but we looked at him and considered him best over others. So we did look at others, and it's exactly the way that employers need to approach this, to be quite honest, because absolutely, definitely, they're not all the same. Some apprenticeship training providers are using material from an organisation that Nick might have, and it doesn't mention payroll. It's an accountancy qualification, or it's an HR qualification, and they're trying to sort of like slip in the word payroll here and there. The terrible thing, if an employer is investing, and they will have to invest some time and money into this apprenticeship, and the last thing they want is for the apprentice to fail endpoint assessment. That's why look at your ATP, your training provider, and say, are you going to meet the learning outcomes? Because the last thing you want is for them to fail. And it's terrible when I have to fail an apprentice. Adam, do you know, you're going to have to unmute yourself now, because I'm going back to you. Oh. Is everybody frozen? Or is it just me on it? Nick, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Ian, but...
Oh, right, okay. I think Adam...
I can hear you as well, Ian. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah, maybe it's Adam that has just frozen, or did he drop off?
I don't know. He's still here, but anyway, we'll just carry on going. So thank you very much, Ian and Nick. That was absolutely fascinating. So I don't know what's happened to Adam, but we will carry on anyway. We're going to go to some questions if you've got time, guys, and if you haven't, then obviously we can always open you up to questions within the PBA LinkedIn group. We just wanted to just quickly say that there will be a next webinar on the 3rd of September, which will be held by Adam, and that's going to be covering some HR essentials, basically to do with the Good Work Plan issued by the government, and the redundancies and holiday pay, and some other considerations. And we'll have an employment lawyer available as well for questions and answers. So Adam's just going to come back into the room now. If you wanted to collapse the website, Ian, that'd be absolutely fine. And if any of our attendees want to unmute themselves, and we can look at them all. And if you have questions, please do unmute yourselves and ask Ian and Nick anything specific.
Absolutely. Go on, Linda, go for it. No questions?
Right, I've just tried to unmute everybody. I'm just hoping that they are unmuted.
I've got a question. I think you do have to unmute yourself actually quite often, everybody. But that's not my question. My question is, you might, I don't know if you know this, the additional incentives that you mentioned that come in from 1st of August, is that for new learning or new employee?
It's new employees. It's
Right.
new employees. So it's, yeah, it's, the apprenticeship generally is for upskilling, but those incentives are for new employees.
Okay, makes sense.
Because that's all what it's about. Because Rishi, he wants to get new employees. Yeah,
it makes sense.
Linda, no questions?
I actually have got a question. Sorry, yeah,
Go for it.
you made me come out and ask one. It was actually around the incentives, like you'd said, and you said obviously that gets paid to the ATP, and then that gets passed back on to the employer and goes back onto the digital board. I can't think of the word that I'm looking for.
Yeah, the digital service.
Thank you. Yes, that's the one that I was looking for. Does that essentially just get rolled up as an element of money that you then need to spend on apprenticeship? Sorry.
Wow.
That's something you can draw down elsewhere.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting actually, because we haven't got the details. The only details we've got are take on an apprentice between the 1st of August and the 31st of January, and you'll get £1,000. But there might, when the legislation comes out, it might say, well, that £1,000 actually it's got to be used in WH Smiths, or it's got to be used to prop up some organisation, or it's got to be used for apprenticeships. It might do. We haven't got the details. But if it's to be used for apprenticeships, then that just reduces the cost of the apprenticeship in actual fact, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But at the moment, all Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson have said, get £1,000, get £1,000. We don't know.
Yeah. Thank you.
I've got a question actually, Ian.
Yeah.
Do the apprenticeships run with a school year, or does it just basically depend on the training provider when they start?
It depends on the apprenticeship training provider. I mean, Nick, probably you're better to talk about this.
Yeah, we'll on board at any point in the year that aligns with what the employer wants. So yeah, but yeah, some employers may choose. Some ATPs may choose to do it on a cyclical basis, so they're onboarding specific cohorts at set times in the year. But we tend to work throughout the year.
The way that I'm seeing apprentices come through as I'm assessing them, it's virtually sort of like, it's virtually one every week, to be quite honest. And just regarding the success of it, when I'm talking to my relationship manager, I'm talking to him tomorrow about level 5. He last told me there's well over 500 people. There's well over 500 payroll apprentices. I hope I'm not going to have to assess them all, to be quite honest. But yeah, it's one a week. So that implies it implies that the apprenticeship training providers are starting them at different times. I don't think you've got one apprentice that's brighter than others. So I think it's every month they're starting the program again, which must be difficult for their trainers, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
It is difficult, is it?
Well, I mean, yeah, it is. We're a smaller operation than some of the large training providers. So we currently have 3 different cohorts running. But yeah, that brings with it challenges in terms of them being at different points in the course. So yeah, I can imagine for a larger operation that's only compounded further. But I think we've got to do it that way, as you say.
Yeah, no, what other way? I mean, I suppose a training provider could say, well, we only start in September, we run with the school year. I suppose they could say that.
They could, yeah.
I mean, they can do whatever they like, to be quite honest, but check with the training provider.
How long does it take to complete the level 3 apprenticeship?
The apprenticeship is 18 months, am I right?
Yeah,
such a long time ago that we did this.
Our course. I think the official guidance on the website says that the duration is 18 to 24 months. I would tend to think that 18 months would be the long end in terms of how we would aim to get an apprentice probably from start to end in no more than 18 months.
Okay. And what's the plan for the pathway from a level 3 onwards? Where can a learner go after that?
I've been working on level 5. Oh God, I've been working on it for ages, and then there's COVID came up, and it's just delayed things. And I said to my relationship manager only a few weeks ago, I said, I'm sick of this thing, because I wake up every night thinking about it. I'm saying I'm sick of it. I want to get it out to the profession. I'm sick of employers coming to me. When will it be ready? When will it be ready? So the plan, I've got the proposal for level 5 was approved in November, and we really were ready to go in April, and then everything just kicked off. So I've got the draft standard now, and I've sent that out to the Trailblazer, haven't I, Nick?
Yeah, you have, yeah. And
I've got the draft standard, and I've improved on the draft standard because I've corrected the typos in it now. And I'm meeting with him about the endpoint assessment plan tomorrow. So we are deciding for definite the assessment methods, which is going to be similar but not the same as for level 3. And I'm hoping that we will be on course to submit that for approval middle of September. So it would be available end of November. But of course it's available. The apprenticeship would be live the end of November, but it will need someone like Nick to take it up, to deliver.
Yeah, and I really like the fact that there's it's from level 5 onwards, it's a management qualification as well as a payroll qualification, essentially. So that's a pathway, I think, which is what people want to see. I fully intend that we will also offer the level 5 course, although I think after just about finishing writing the level 3 course, I need to lie down in a dark room for a bit before I'm ready to start with level 5. So I'm feeling a little bit jaded, but yeah, we're really keen to deliver that too.
Okay, so if somebody went on to an apprenticeship now and came out in 18 months, there could be an offering for levels 5 available.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the apprenticeship will be live. I mean, by the time it will be live. Now, whether there's ATPs that pick it up, but I know of one ATP that's going to pick it up. Nick's said that they're going to pick it up.
We will.
You will. So
yeah.
So there will be delivery options out there. Yes, there will. Yeah.
You haven't even mentioned level 7, Ian. That's got to come one day too.
Well, yeah, then you've got the degree. Now, I was chatting to Kate actually yesterday. I said, I don't think I can do the degree. I just don't think I could do it. The administrator is sort of like your tax, national insurance, and all that kind of thing. It's your grounding, as Nick says, your ground. Level 5 is more sort of like in your typical organization. It's more of your sort of like your middle management. So you've got to be able to do your manual calculation. You've got to be able to do your level 3 stuff, but you've got to be able to supervise, motivate, communicate, and all that kind of thing. So more like a team leader thing, but then levels, so less payroll. And the payroll that's in there is complex payroll, so we have more benefits in kind, termination payments and that kind of thing. But level 7, I mean, how many level 7 payroll managers do you know? I mean, I know some, and they say, well, actually, I don't know payroll at all. Because they need to be able to lead, don't they? Strategic things and discipline and all that kind of thing. But I think
providers are going to have to bring in some support to be able to develop the level 7 course. You're unlikely to have all of those skills in-house yourself. So I think that's going to be to do it properly. But yeah, that's in the future.
But in answer to your question, Tracy, yes, there is going to be a deliberate apprenticeship pathway. And what I really hope, and I've hoped for years, to be quite honest, is that training organisations that currently offer a commercial qualification would perhaps bring their commercial qualification in line with what the industry actually wants, because that's what the industry has said to me. Well, this is what we want. Well, if you've got other people delivering what the industry has said that they don't want, why are they doing it? So that I would hope that they bring it in line, but there's not a lot of sign of that at the moment. Has it helped?
I think it's been fantastic. For me, it's been fantastic, Ian, honestly, and Nick has been, it's really, really helped me understand what's available, how to access the funding, what the offering is, what they cover, what an apprentice, how to support an apprentice. So no, it's certainly demystified the whole process for me personally.
Good. Oh, good.
I've got another question if we've got time.
Good Lord. Go on, go for it.
I think we've probably got time just enough for one more.
One more, okay. So you did mention, I wonder if you could speak a bit more about if you find a training provider, it seems a bit wrong that they should be on a register of approved training providers, but then there might be gaps in the learning outcomes. Which seems wrong to me, but you did sort of allude to it might not matter because you could plug those gaps by other means, but you didn't really expand on that.
Well, no, absolutely not. I've been dealing with a training provider that delivers other apprenticeships, and they thought, oh no, we'll have a go at the payroll one. So they thought, well, actually, we've got we can deliver the skills and behaviours. A bit like Nick, in actual fact, you had because the skills and behaviours for a payroll administrator are not that different from the skills and behaviours for an HR person, a business admin person. So if you've got those in place, you can probably manipulate them a little bit towards payroll. What's different for payroll is the technical knowledge. So what this training provider is looking at doing is buying in that technical knowledge. So rather than develop it themselves like Nick has done, they're just buying it in. The problem with buying it in is that information doesn't cover all of the learning outcomes. That's where I'm saying to this training provider, you've got to find out who's going to plug those gaps. Oh, this organisation will plug the gaps. But I said, have they even identified what gaps there are? Oh, that's up to them. That's up to them. And I'm really worried, training provider, that what will happen at the end is these people will be taught this generic course and the apprentice will fail. So it really is, I really do think that the employer needs to go through, well, how are you going to meet this learning outcome number one, and how are you going to do this? And the apprenticeship training provider should be able to come back and say, oh yeah, we've got a course, yeah, module 7 does that, or week 3 does that, or something like that. And I mean, your course specifically, Nick, as per the learning outcomes, haven't you?
Yeah, I think, Ian, as well, the thing that really frustrates me about the Institute website is you pointed out earlier that employers should look at the success percentage of the provider.
Yeah.
The one thing that I have to say drives me mad is that the success percentage is for the provider as a whole, not just for the payroll course.
Right. Yes, you're right.
I feel like we've lost potential apprentices because employers, I think for Leicestershire County Council as a whole, it's something like 65% success, which doesn't sound that amazing really. But I think people go on it. It doesn't make it clear that's not the payroll core percentage. That's the council as a whole percentage. So that, and the fact that, yeah, it enables providers to be registered on there who perhaps haven't demonstrated that they've met all the learning outcomes, are two frustrating aspects of the IFA website route.
Yeah, I agree. But that's where the employer has really got to take responsibility, I think, because it is a financial commitment, it's a time commitment as well. And we want decent people in the profession. We don't want people that are being educated substandard and are going to fail the apprenticeship. So who takes control there? The only person that can take control is the employer, because the apprenticeship training provider, of course, is going to say, yes, our course material is fantastic. Yeah, we've got this mentoring system, and yeah, we've got this fantastic infrastructure. Of course they're going to say that. You're not going to get an apprenticeship training provider that says, well, actually, no, it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that, because they're all into sales. So the employer, I think, has really got to say, well, how are you going to do this and how are you going to do that? Take it on themselves and be comfortable, like the builder that's in the barn at the moment, and say, well, how are you going to do this, and where are you going to get this from? Where are you going to get this from? Where are you going to get corrugated iron in a lockdown in Wales, which has only just been lifted? But he said, no, I can do it. So we hired him, and that's what employers have got to do.
Well, luckily, it seems like if you're on this call, then you're probably doing your due diligence. So that's good. It's just you worry about the wider landscape, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. Sorry to sort of cut you both off, but I'm aware that we've gone on for hours. An hour and 40 minutes. I'd like to say thank you for everyone for tuning in for so long. That's one of the reasons why we tend to hold webinars at the beginning of the month, because we know it's slightly quieter and we can take that little bit longer rather than try fitting these in during hectic final week of the month. Just a reminder of our next webinar will be on the 3rd of September. It'll be myself and a colleague I used to work with, Donal Moon, presenting HR Essentials for Payrollers. That'll give you an insight into the Good Work Plan, redundancy and taxation payments, holiday pay calculations, and various other bits and pieces. So we'll be getting that information up on the PBA LinkedIn group. So please do register for that. And just a final thing for me to say, thank you very much to both Ian and Nick for presenting and taking the time to do it. It's great that we have that we attract such heavyweights such as yourselves to be able to sort of come and speak to us and present to everyone. And I hope that everyone found it really interesting. Tracy, as Ian alluded to, does have all of the handouts and bits and pieces, and because you've all registered, she'll have your email addresses and we will send that out afterwards, so you have all that to hand. And as Ian mentioned, just finally, if you do have any questions about this or anything else, then please do post them in the PBA group, so that everyone can see what questions been asked rather than ask the same question 3 or 4 times privately. So thank you all very, very much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again at future webinars.
Thank
Thanks, everyone.
you.
Thanks, guys.
Take
Thank you.
care.